Started and kick our art seminar off for today. I have a couple of announcements before we introduce our guest for this art seminar. Summer and fall registration. If you have not met with your advisor yet, get that taken care of, get registered for classes, get in the classes that you need. If you have questions and you're trying to register, talk to your art advisor. Another announcement, our juried student show call for entries is in its last week. The deadline for entries is going to be April 6th, which is Thursday. We have kind of a part 2 to our framing workshop this afternoon at the Northwest Art Center. If you're still interested in getting pieces framed, learning how to do that, getting frame stock, all of those things, do that today. If you need volunteering for a class or a course, there's opportunities for that this coming week as we prepare for the juried student art show at the Art Center. I also want to mention, all the announcements here that are on your blue sheet. And then go online if you need a call for entries form or stop by the Art Center for the juried student art show. Our guest for today is Rob Anderson. Rob Anderson was born in New Rockford, so he's a North Dakota boy. And went to Minot State for elementary education and art education, and then a master's of education, taught in the Minot public school system for many years, and also was faculty here at Minot State in the art ed program for a number of years as well. In his own practice, Rob is a printmaker, working primarily with monotypes and monoprints. But also does some really neat new paper constructions that we get to see too. One thing I would like to mention is that Rob currently has an exhibition up at the Taube Museum of Art, Relationships, until April 29th. It is on now. And there is a reception for that exhibition on April 6th, 5 to 7. So catch that before you go on Easter break. It will be one of your event opportunities for Art Seminar. And without any more of me talking, we will get Rob up here. Thank you. Thank you. All right.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. I was told that this is as far maybe this way as I could go, and then this way, and probably don't step off of here. If I do, don't yell at me. When I taught in the elementary classroom and when I taught art, I might stand over there or all over the place. So I'm not used to being in one confined area. I was an art teacher. I was an elementary classroom teacher to start with, and then I became an art teacher for the public schools and here at Minot State. And since this is an art class and I'm an art ed person, let's make a piece of art. You should have two. When I was growing up, we called these pipe cleaners. Politically correct, now we would say chenille stick rather than a pipe cleaner. I'm not sure why. Does anybody need two of these? Thank you. Now, what we're going to do is a piece of sculpture with this, and we're going to do a human form. I'm going to give you two options. I will tell you how to do it, or I will show you how to do it to make this human form out of these. Which would you prefer?
Show.
Show? Okay, with that then, I'm going to stop talking. does it look like a human form, or somewhat of a representation of the human form anyway?
Yeah.
Okay, now there's a couple of things that I would do with these. And you could do this with high school kids or middle school kids. Obviously I was an elementary art teacher, so I did it mostly with elementary age kids. But there's several implications. You could use this as a model for gesture drawing. You could actually make a three-dimensional image of a gesture drawing. What I most often did with elementary age kids was have them pose the figure doing some kind of activity, and then we would see if the rest of the kids in the class could figure out or guess what it is the body is posed to do. As far as an educational piece, the implications of that is pretty simple. We know that kids come to our classrooms with different skills and abilities and many different learning styles. So let me ask you, would this have been easier had I just told you how to do it? Would it have been easier if I had told you and showed you how to do it? Yeah, see, and that's something I think, and I know many of you are not education majors, art ed majors, but just knowing that those students come to us with a lot of different learning styles, just that demonstrates that. Some students would have just a terrible failure out of trying to create that human form with those pipe cleaners, and would have been more successful if I'd have even drawn pictures for them maybe. And but some kids that are visual learners, the way I showed you is the best way to do that. As I came into this seminar, I thought about something that I thought before when I did this once before was, would you want to hear more about my experiences as an art educator or as an artist? And I thought, well, maybe a little bit of each might be a good thing. How many of you are art ed majors? Okay, good number. I'm excited for that. Something that I'm going to tell you as far as an artist, I am both a working artist and an art educator. Even though I've retired from the public schools and retired from Minot public schools, I still am an art educator. I come at least once a semester and teach a class for Micah. I get into the public schools occasionally and teach classes. And our church is right in the beginning stages of developing an arts ministry, and I've taught some classes there. But I think even as a working artist, we should all be educators. First of all, we should be advocates for the arts at any level in any place. And what better way to do that as an artist than to help with art education and hopefully attract more people to our profession as artists. I do have some examples of my work. Some of these pieces you will see at the Taube. Some of them you won't see because some are older. But I am, like I said, a print artist. I primarily make prints. I use a process that implements a jelly plate. Are you familiar with a jelly plate? If you were in the elementary art methods class, you probably used those. I like using those. It's a simple process. It works well and it's non-threatening for elementary age kids to do that. I also create blocks out of foam to print, and I cut my own stencils. For instance, the pelican is cut out of a stencil. A lot of the pieces of that are done with foam block prints or found textures or whatever. It gives you an idea of the kind of work that I do. I've been experimenting, trying to play around with landscapes, and after over a year of trying to play with that, I don't feel I'm real successful at it yet, but we'll see how that goes. I am a runner, and every time I retire a pair of running shoes, I try to create a piece of art to commemorate that a little bit, and this is called Retired because it was a pair of shoes that I stopped using, so I used it as a model for this print. And that was another piece that I used the soles of a shoe that I retired to print the background of that. I won't get into the legend of the dragonflies. I love storytelling along with teaching art. And if you get a chance to look at the legend of the dragonfly, this is called the Truth Seeker. because it does actually deal with dragonflies seeking the truth. And so I created that piece. I'm going to tell you now, this looks much better on the slide than it does in real life. I don't know if that's ever happened to you. I almost threw it away or printed over the top of it until I took a picture of it. And the photograph turned out so well. I'll hang on to it for a while. I am a man of faith. I'm a Christian. And a lot of my work, the title of my show is Relationships. And a lot of my work, I deal with the relationship that I have with God, my relationship with other men or people, and my relationship with nature. And this is called Be Still. Many times I just illustrate a parable or stories out of the Bible. I thought this was interesting. I don't know if it's true or not. These are tilapia, or the best I could do to create a tilapia. Somebody told me, or I read it somewhere, that the fish that they caught in the Holy Land around biblical times was a fish pretty similar to a tilapia. And so that, I must be hitting a button here. That piece is called St. Peter's fish, because I think that's sometimes what they refer to as the tilapia. So you get an idea of how I do my work. The background, I should quit putting my fingers on here. The background of this piece has about 3 or 4 different layers to it. And it's easiest to see this one. This is 6 inches. And I printed the background doing 3 or 4 layers using a 6-inch block of jelly foam, or jelly plates. And so they overlap, and it took me quite a while to finish it. But and then some of the images in the background are done with block printing. Use a foam block. And again, I cut this is called 12 Ordinary Men, and I cut the stencils myself, and then I used ink to create those human forms. Sometimes I would tell kids, what you really have to do sometimes is just play with color and play with shapes and or whatever you want to do with the stuff you have. I had gotten a new kind of paint. I think it was a new brand of paint. And I was just playing around with it and printed this human form, and this showed up. So it kind of has an angelic look to it, I suppose, because it looks like wings on it. That was not my intentions at all. And so after I saw it, I did kind of like the ink and the paint that I used on it, only I used a piece of scrap paper, just an old Ditto paper with, I think it had a test on the other side, that I printed this on. So I've hung on to it, but I think sometimes that's what happens when we create art. Just playing around gives us different images. I'm going to jump to this. I do a thing that I call cut layered paper, and this is layers of cardstock that I cut by hand. And I don't know if I can explain this so it's clear to you. When I created this, I started with 1 black sheet of cardstock, and you can see that line goes all the way around the outside and forms the cross in the middle. I cut that out. So I have this black sheet of paper, and after I'm done cutting the first layer, all that's left is those black lines. And I'll use the word laminate because it's kind of a fancy word. It's a fancy word to say I glue. So what I did next was take a sheet of brown paper and glued it to the back of that black, and then started cutting again. So everything that you see there that is not brown or black has been cut away. And there may be 20 different layers of paper there that are laminated together, and just keep cutting away and dividing them into sections until there is nothing left to cut out of them. And I do mostly crosses. I'll go back to these. Here's some fish that I've done, and a goose and a bee. And it's a good thing to show this. I am a Viking fan. Sorry to say sometimes, but my son is also a Vikings fan, and he asked me once if I would create something out of the Vikings logo. And I said, no, I can't do that. Well, as an artist, you know that. I don't own this image. You know, somebody who owns it has a lot more money than I have. But someone owns that image. Well, so I told him, I said, you know what, I will do that. But you understand, you can't give it away, you can't sell it, you can't do anything with it. You can hang it in your office and that will be it. And I do have that conversation a lot with young artists and student artists. Things that you can use as far as images and can't use. And this is a good example and a good place to jump into that conversation with that. I'll show you just a few more of the crosses that I've done. I've done about 100 of them maybe. And they're all done in the same process. We'll go to that. Anyway, that's, we can talk about that a little bit later. I'd like to talk a little bit about why we teach art. And even if you're not an art ed major where you think you're going to get into that profession to teach art, I would like to encourage you as a working artist to still do that. You know, the Taube offers classes, the North Dakota Council on the Arts offer classes, the Artists in Residence programs, and Minot Area Council on the Arts does that as well. So as an artist, I would encourage you to get involved with that. Simply to share what you have as far as your skill and your knowledge and your expertise, and to help other people along with that track, if you could. As far as why we teach art, there may be a lot of reasons that we can come up with. We could study a lot of data, and a lot of data will show you how important things like music can be to regular education, or dance and music, and you know, all of those things, how they could affect the student in their regular education classes. And I always felt we had to be careful about quoting data too much. Maybe Bill can talk about that a little bit, or at some point, or Ryan, you know, because all the data we can feed to the public, somebody will find lots of data to show that what we're showing them is not that important. So my favorite argument for why we should teach art, I'm stealing from a social studies professor that I had here at Minot State. He said that, how do we learn what it means to be a human being without the humanities? You know, so I think that's our best argument for teaching art. We can get human beings to understand who they are and how unique they might be from other things that live on our planet. I think that's an important thing. I had a slide on here. I wasn't sure if I was going to share this, but I'm going to put it on here anyway, if I can find it again. That had the habits of mind. Now, these happen to be the artist's habits of mind. Experts have done a lot of research about the brain and how it works. Are you familiar with the habits of the mind? And there are people that research, and I say they think about thinking. They research how the brain works and how people are successful. They relate it to a lot of things that deal with problem solving. Maybe this, you know, what you need to be a successful problem solver, or to do a project that needs to be done. And they came up with these 16 things that people whose brains work well, these are the characteristics that they have. Well, then a group of researchers from Harvard took that same idea, and then they created this list that's called the artist. The artist's habits of mind. And they really overlap. They're pretty much related. But it's how artists think. Is kind of what it does. And I still think that probably the most important thing that if we talk about the habits of the mind and how the mind works, it's people who have the ability to think outside of the box, maybe. The ability to expand on something, or to wonder how something works the way it does. Or wonder other possibilities if they're looking for an answer to something. You know, there's so much emphasis on education today with writing and reading and math and science, and most of those teach that there's one right answer to a question. And involvement in the arts really takes us to the point where there maybe is more than one right answer. And some experts are telling us we need to be able to think of some of the other possibilities if we're going to solve some of the problems that we have in our world today. Anyway, I thought we should touch on that. And if that's something, again, you're not familiar with, it might be something you'd want to explore if you could. I'm a strong believer in discipline-based art education. I'll tell you up front, in my mind, production, making art is the most important part of that. But there are 4 other parts to discipline-based art education program. Production would probably be the first one, and most people would probably list that first. And we talk about art criticism as a second one. Getting students to talk about their art and the art of other people. You know, talk about things that they like or don't like or whatever, or even talk about their process. I think even at elementary level, you can get kids to talk about their art. It might not be very sophisticated conversation, but they will talk about their art. We talk about art history. Now, and that's probably 2 aspects of doing this conversation about art history. We can talk about the history of our culture and our society or history of the world centered around art. But we also need to understand how history has influenced art as well. You know, and that goes on today when we talk about you know, our culture and the kind of things that we look at. I often shudder sometimes when I think about some of the images and the sounds that young people are bombarded with today in the name of art. And quite honestly, some of it isn't very good. It has nothing to do with whether I'm religious or conservative or liberal or whatever. Just some of the stuff kids are looking at and listening to is just not very good. And I think it's important that we look at art in its context. And that might be where we talk about art, I lost the word I wanted. Aesthetics, when it comes to teaching art. That's the 4th aspect, aesthetics. And that might be simply defining what is art or defining what is beautiful. And understand, everybody has a different opinion about what's beautiful and what's a good piece of art and what's not a good piece of art. I guess maybe a good way to explain it, I'm not a big rap fan. My grandson is. But I enjoy listening to some of that music. And I understand that as I listen to it, I see some things that I think are pretty good, some things that are not so good. But that's where our aesthetics would come in. Helping our students judge what maybe is a good piece of art and what is not a good piece of art, what is beautiful and what isn't beautiful. As an artist, I think we're constantly talking about or seeking what is truth. What is truth in our art? And again, I think that's very important that we explore that. The biggest problem that we might have when we start talking about getting into all these parts of art education, especially at the elementary level, there's no time. When I was an itinerant art teacher for Minot Public Schools, I traveled to every one of the elementary schools in the year. And to try to do art production and art history and art criticism and aesthetics all in one setting was almost impossible. The district was very supportive of me to support my belonging to the National Art Education Association, and I went to their conference every year for several years, and you meet a lot of people, you know, a group of artists get together and we have lots to talk about, I suppose. And there was about 10 people around a table, and everybody started talking about where they taught. And I don't remember numbers in my head, so I'm just going to throw these out there. There was a lady over here from Memphis, Tennessee, and she taught in 2 schools, and maybe taught just 5th and 6th grade. And the next lady taught in Colorado, and she taught in 1 school. That was her whole job, art job, teaching one. They all went around the room, and most of them had very limited numbers of classrooms and numbers of schools. And you should have seen their faces when I said, I'm from Minot, North Dakota. I teach elementary art in 13 schools. And their jaws just dropped. Well, how do you do that? Well, you just do what you have to do. It was our goal when we established that position to try to give every elementary student in Minot Public Schools an experience with an art specialist. And sometimes, some of those years, those first couple of years, that meant I was maybe in a classroom for 1 hour in the whole year to teach art. After 2 years of that, I went and talked to the assistant superintendent, and I said, well, first of all, I should tell you, when I decided to do that job, it had been filled by 2 other people before me. And several people asked me, are you going to apply for that job when it opens up? And I said, no. Why would I do that? I help write the job description. It's too much work, you know, to try to get to all the elementary schools. And well, then after a couple of people filled the position, I decided to give it a try. And then after 2 years of doing that, I went to the assistant superintendent and said, did we establish any rules that said I have to be in every elementary classroom in Minot Public Schools? And he kind of frowned and he said, he just passed the buck, but this is what he said. It's your job to define. I said, really? You know, nobody gets to define their own job, do they, in this world? But anyway, that's what he said to me. So I immediately stopped teaching in the primary grades. I would go into a first grade classroom if I got a request from a teacher. I focused on 4th and 5th grade, that was all. And it was a great experience for the kids, much better for me and the students. I wasn't so frazzled at the end of the day. I did have a couple of teachers that were 3rd grade teachers, and they were not real happy. They said, well, when are our kids going to be able to work with you then, if you're not going to teach in the 3rd grade? And I just said, next year. When they're in 4th grade, I will be teaching art in the 4th grade classrooms. Anyway, it was a great experience to do that. They no longer have that position available. And sometimes it's kind of sad when I see all the students, the great work that's done in the elementary methods classes here, and you don't see a lot of that carried over into the public schools. I want to talk a little bit about creativity, because this might be an oversimplification, but creativity is something that we all have. We don't teach creativity. I mean, if you have a brain, you can be creative, because that's how the brain works. You know, we think of images and we think of the possibilities. What we have to do is exercise that brain in its creativity. Give students a lot of opportunity to explore creativity and what that means. And I used to say, I could test your creativity. It's a pretty simple thing to do, because and again, this may be an oversimplification of the definition of it, but I think creativity is the ability to take something that you know already, something you're familiar with, and think of it in a different way or use it in a different way. If you can do that, take something very familiar to you and think about it in a different way and use it in a different way. So we're going to test that with you. I'm going to take something that's very familiar to you. A word, one word, and that one word is your name. And it's probably, of all the words that you have in your vocabulary, the one that's the most familiar to you. Because you see that word, you hear that word, you say that word, you write that word, probably more than any other word in your vocabulary is your name. So we're going to see if you can use that, visualize it in a different way, and then use it in a different way. Now, if you can do this with your eyes open, you can. If you want to close your eyes, you can do that. And I want you to imagine that your name is written on a chalkboard in front of you in great big block letters. You know, and right now I'm visualizing my first name is Robert. I can see the R, the O, the B, the E, the R, the T. They're all right there. And if I were working in a classroom with kids, I'd probably go around and we'd be in a circle to do this for one thing. I'm just going to ask some of you just to tell me what your first name is.
Allie.
Allie? Say it again.
Eva.
Ava. And I did that on purpose because I'm going to probably have to ask some of you to repeat it because I don't hear very well.
Ryan.
Ryan. Say it again.
Keela.
Keela. Okay.
Erica.
Erica.
Diana.
Diana.
Alexa.
Alyssa. Alexa.
Bill.
Bill.
Timothy.
Timothy. So you have that you have that image in your brain that what your name looks like. You could probably spell it. You could probably write it very easily. So I want you to imagine. We're going to see if we can imagine this word differently. Imagine that somebody came along and erased your name on that bulletin board or on the chalkboard or whiteboard and wrote it backwards. So I want you, in your imagination, can you picture what that word would look like if it was written backwards? So I'm going to give you some time even to imagine that a little bit. R-O-B-E-R-T. If it was reversed, it would be T-R-E-B-O-R. You know, and can you picture that? Just take a minute to look at that. Now, so if you're able to visualize that, you have the ability to look at something different than you originally thought about it. Now we're going to use it. Can we use that information? So I want you to imagine, what would that word sound like if your name really was spelled backwards? What would it sound like? I'll give you a chance to think on that. You know, Robert forwards, Trebor backwards. Now, understand I practice that a lot. I've done that a lot. So can you imagine what it would sound like if your name really was spelled backwards? Think about that, because I'm going to ask some of you to tell me what it is. Okay, tell me.
Uriger Letev.
I love that. Say it again.
Uriger Letev.
You even did your last name. Holy moly.
Mayor.
Nayer.
Itomet.
Itomet.
Rovert.
Say it again.
Rovert.
Rovert. Very good. Tell
Excel.
Well, that's very good. You might want to change your name to that. I don't like the sound of that. No. Mm-hmm. Say it again. It's not easy, is it? Yeah, you can think on that. Tell me.
I had it when I was doing the
Yeah. Anybody?
like the aim.
Is that aim? Okay, this is what we'll do. Let's just take 30 seconds and turn to the person next to you and introduce yourself using that name. All right. And if nothing else, that kind of breaks the tension. You get a little more relaxed and comfortable with this, and you've been sitting here for, well, 45 minutes almost, and that's what happens. I like doing that activity, and I do think the more practice we get kids at being creative, the better off we will be as a society and as a culture, I think. I always thought something was really interesting when I would teach art, and even when I taught art methods at Minot State, we would be doing a project, and I would give them directions on what my expectations might be. And I'll just use a very simple example. Somebody might come up and say, and this happens a lot in elementary classrooms, and it maybe happen in middle school and high school. Someone would come up and say, can we use red? And my thought is, why can't you use red? And then that's often would be my response. Well, why can't you use red? Well, give me a reason why you couldn't if you think you'd like to use red. And the amazing thing with that is, even going back to colors, I always like to do a lesson covering the artist Vasily Kandinsky. You know, he's abstract expressionist, you know, lots of bright colors and shapes and forms. And to do a production piece after talking about Kandinsky and music and how the two would be tied together, I would say, okay, we're going to make a piece of art. We're going to use oil pastels on this sheet of paper. Pick a color. You can use any color. And understand, you can use any color anytime, as much as you want or as little as you want. Pick any color. And I purposely would wait until they all had an oil pastel in their hand before I would reach down and take a color. And you would be amazed at how many times the students, if I picked blue, they put theirs back and took the blue. For some reason, if I pick that color, it must be the best color to use, or the right color to use. And that's what we sometimes have to get past at all levels of kids, is to be independent thinkers. Now, maybe I shouldn't tell this story, but when I was handing out the pipe cleaners today, someone came along, and everybody's taking those, are just fine. And one of the students, I don't remember how she said it, she said something about picking the colors that she wanted, and the person next to her said, well, you could use red and orange. Oh, okay. and I thought, so whose choice was that? And it's okay. Kids do that all the time. You know, they look for advice from other people, but all of a sudden, when we tell, as teachers, when we tell them what they have to use, we're taking their choices away from them. Or if someone else tells them what they can use, they're taking the choices away from them. That's their pick. So I often would use that phrase, why can't you? Or if they say, no, you have to tell me what I should use. And you know, sometimes if they really push me, then I will say, okay, use red and green. And then when you're done, it's my art, give it to me. Because I made those choices, not you. You know, if we can get to that point if we have to. And anyway, that's enough of that. I don't know if there was anything else that I'm going to talk just a few moments about probably more for an educator than an artist, a working artist. But at the same time, you can probably use this advice. I go to work when I was working, whether I was in an elementary classroom or teaching art at Minot State or the public schools or even at our church. I go with the intent that I'm going to have fun. You know, I take care of myself first, always have. You know, I have a family. I have 3 children and 9 grandchildren and a great-granddaughter. And but when it comes to my job, I take care of myself first. Because I know if I go into that classroom and I'm going to have fun, I'm planning on having fun, more than likely the students that I work with will have fun as well. If they see I'm there and I'm enjoying it, and they like that as well. Whether you are a working artist or an educator, my piece of advice to you as far as making art is try to make art every day. You know, a lot of working artists have to find something else to make a living. We don't make a lot of money sometimes selling our art. Not very many of us could do that. And if you're going into that with that in mind, you know, if you're a graphic designer, that's one thing, you can do that. But if you're planning on becoming an artist and making money, you better have a good career track in mind for something else. But try to always find time to make art, and try to keep a place that you can always make art, because that's going to be important to you. You need that for yourself. And I don't think it's a problem. I'm going to tell you a story about Micah. I think it was the second year that Mike was at Minot State. We were having a conversation about artists and making art and teaching art, and I said, and Mike is a fabulous artist. I hope if you haven't seen his work, you've seen some of his work. I said to him, I asked him a question. I said, Micah, tell me, how much time in your life do you find to make art yourself? Just for yourself to make art. And he was kind of sitting back on the edge of his desk, I think, his big long legs, and he stood up and took a giant step towards me and did this. 0. I thought, really? That's wrong. That's wrong. And unfortunately, that's more the case than not. If you're an educator in the arts, and you have a family, you don't have a lot of time to do that. So a big piece of advice, even if it's for a half hour, try to find time to make art in your life. And I think that's all I have to say. I would invite you, if you get a chance, to stop down at the Taube and see my work. I think it's pretty good. I don't know. And I would be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any questions. Well, we're not really too early. I wanted to leave some time at the end in case somebody did have some questions of me or about what I do or who I am. Or.
All right, do we have any questions for Rob?
Yes.
What type of paint do you use, and what type of paper, and if you're gluing stuff, what type of glue do you use?
I try to always use archival quality of stuff. And when you buy things, it will probably say that on there, that it's archival quality. I like to print on watercolor paper. I'm not sure why. When I first started printmaking, you can buy printmaking paper. I had a lot of watercolor paper. And so I thought, well, I'm going to try it and see how it works. And I think a lot of artists do that. I do print on rice paper. I love printing on rice paper. It's got such a nice feel to it, and it's lightweight, and you can get, even out of the paper, some translucency out of it, depending on the paint. I use water-based paints and inks. I use acrylic mostly. I have experimented a little bit with watercolors on the jelly plates. I won't live long enough to probably master that, but I see some work done with watercolors and along with printmaking. I do use water-based inks. I like Dick Blick. I don't know. I suppose that goes back to my days as an elementary educator. It's a safe ink to use, I believe. Dick Blick watercolor-based ink is safe to use. Is that all for the questions?
And then the glue, what type of
glue? Oh, shoot. It's just 2 letters. Why can't it's escaped me because I just switched to this new. The important thing with glue is if you look at, if it might say archival quality or it might be acid free. When I do use cardstock on the layered pieces that I make, the one thing you want to make sure that it says it's acid free and lignin free. Bill, am I that the right word? Lignin free? Okay. Because I understand this. This is the science of art, maybe. If it might be acid free, but it may not stay that way. And so if you use lignin free paper, then I think you're safe to do that. Did that help?
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, and maybe if you talk, depends on what kind of texture you want. If you use watercolor paper, is hot press paper smooth and cold press is rough? Hot press paper is probably what you want. But unless you like the texture, that texture will show up if you are not careful with that. If you were a purist and using jelly plates, you should probably make your own. And I guess it's fairly easy. I'm too lazy. I just buy them. And you can buy them in different sizes, and you can stencil them out, or use masks to create shapes on them, and I've used them for years, and they last a long time. If you make them, you can get any size that you want, and a lot of people do make their own. I suppose they feel that they're not a serious artist unless you make your own. That's my son-in-law is a beekeeper, and his mom is kind of the boss of the crew there. There's their dad and 3 boys in this business, and Matt said, "Would you make something for my mom?" And I started working on a print for him, and he said, "No, one of those paper things. I would like to see you do that." So this is it almost could be a portrait of her, because this is called the queen, because it is a queen bee. The image is as close as I could get to a queen bee, and because his mom is the queen there, I think. So that's what I created for her. Yes.
How long do you usually stay on your art pieces? So the time that you try to
The layered paper, I don't have a clue how many hours they take. If I really started doing that for fun, to relax. It may not seem relaxing, but it really is relaxing to me. If I had to charge by the hour, and how long it takes me to make some of those crosses, I'd probably have to charge $1,000 or better for them. I just that I don't. That print, this piece, the 12 Ordinary Men, it took me a long time simply because I printed each one of those 6-inch squares separately, and then printed them again separately, and overlapped, and then did some block printing over the top, and so days, maybe weeks. And I can get really hot and lucky and crank something out in a day, but not too much. That usually ends up in the rag bag, so to speak. That's a good question, because that's a dilemma I think a lot of artists have with how much time you put into your art, and then especially if you want to look at selling it, and how much time you have to create the art. And any other questions I can answer for you? Thank you very much. Bill, did you have a question? Okay. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon. Is that kind of what you were hoping?
Well, thank you.